This time of the year, we usually look back on trends that have made the year unique, and this is especially true of the fashion industry. However, 2020 has been very different. Craig Jacobs, a fashion designer, joins me now to look back on the year and perhaps look forward to 2021. Perhaps I should actually say, Craig, and thank you so much for joining me this evening. I should say to you, not only fashion designer, but businessman, writer, and so forth and so on. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Craig. 2020, remarkably different year.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of industries being affected, and notwithstanding the fashion industry, as it were. But take us through some of just the highlights and some of the trends that we've seen during the course of 2020. I know that it began as a promising year and soon thereafter downward spiral.
Well, I think, the beauty about fashion is it always is intuitive of things, and it tries to adapt to the scenario. And what we saw in terms of the biggest trends was, loungewear, I think, was very important. The kimono became the iconic object or item of clothing that most people were wearing, obviously inspired by Japan. But you needed something when you were lounging around in the house. You wanted to feel relaxed. You wanted to look good. So that was one of the biggest trends. I think one of the other big trends that we saw in terms of fashion was there's a movement towards duality. So this boundaries between men and women have changed a lot, and we've seen a whole lot of celebrities playing around with these constructs as we've taken for granted. Lasizwe just recently shot an editorial for Prevada, which is quite different take on fashion. He's wearing clothes that you would ordinarily associate women should be wearing, and I think that's how the world has changed, that we're breaking down those borders. It also means that you can be, if you running out of something, you can raid your boyfriend's wardrobe. So there's so many other options to find clothing. You don't need to rush out to the shops. The other big trend is kind of armor. So the masks, fashion. Firstly, what was amazing in the pandemic was that fashion designers all around the world, they started making PPE, but they also started looking at clothing in a different kind of way. Their clothing is a form of armor. When you go outside, you don't only have to protect your face, but the way we're dressing now when we go outside is being intuitive of that. So there's a lot more hardware materials coming into play to adapt as the society adapts.
And staying on that trend, and in the fashion space particularly, we also saw people actually becoming more, secure with who they were. I don't know if it had anything to do with the mask, but women were wearing less makeup, still do, and also I think being more accepting of each other. We've ditched the high heels as an example. We're more comfortable in our own skins, and I like the fact that you mentioned duality, because I feel like as a society we've also been just a little bit kinder to one another.
Well, I suppose it's something that happens when you have to pause in a lockdown and you're sitting around with your own thoughts, when you can start thinking about things differently, and I suppose then we realize what's important and what's not so important. And lipstick doesn't work when you're wearing a mask anyway. So, I think that we have started looking at things that we've taken for granted, and absolutely, comfortable shoes. I've got friends of mine who, after a few months of not wearing heels, struggled when they had to go out. They didn't realize how uncomfortable they were. So I think more comfortable shoes as well. It's also a very important trend, because we want to be more, it's not just about fashion anymore, it's about practicality and making yourself feel good.
You mentioned that the beauty about this industry is that it can actually just diversify itself and adapt. So was it hard hit at all? Were there a lot of lessons learned during this time in terms of that adapting you talk of?
Well, look, obviously in South Africa, when the hard lockdown happened, retail stores were closed. And also, people matric dance trick dances for dresses, cancelled black tie events. So absolutely, the fashion industry has been very hard hit. I think as well, it's become a navel-gazing exercise because there's been certain things that have been problematic in the fashion industry. This whole concept about having all these fashion weeks. There's been questions about whether or not that's an effective system to have. The fact that there's so many different seasons, I mean, especially overseas, you've got about 8 different inputs where designers are expected to make clothes. And very importantly about the whole thing is really looking at about discounts and about concepts like Black Friday, which are actually not sustainable for clothing industry. That people become so used to fast fashion and it becomes disposable fashion, and then people don't respect clothing anymore. So I think that the fashion industry, look, growth-wise, I mean, luxury has been hard hit around the world. Certain luxury brands have been super successful because they've been able to pivot. Like, for instance, Dolce & Gabbana have moved more closer to their consumer. But in general, it is an industry almost, I wouldn't say on its knees, but it's trying to find its feet again.
Quickly, before we let you go, you founded Fudutsi in 2004, and you've always been driven just about consciousness and truth in the way you've been running your business. How does one speak about responsible business in this time, you know, going into 2021, when we talk about, you know, businesses that are conscious and more truthful to their consumers?
Well, I think that it starts with when I started my business, I remember that reading that saying by Mahatma Gandhi that you need to be the change you want to see. And I decided I wanted to create something that was positive, that celebrated Africa and wasn't harmful. So being sustainable, I think that's it's more serious now than ever before. I mean, the beauty of the pandemic could show that the earth can breathe. If you look at places like Beijing and stuff, when it was during the lockdown, there was no smog. So we can make a difference, and we need to take on those lessons, and we need to find ways of making a difference through any industry we're in. In clothing in particular, I mean, I think what the very serious issue now is that clothing's become the second biggest cause of landfill.
Absolutely.
So what I'm actually telling people is don't buy clothes. Preserve the clothes you have. Go back to all the things we used to do before, which is investing in having a relationship with the tailor. When something is torn, you get it mended. Look after your clothes. Invest in the right detergents to make sure that they look their best all the time. Because we also don't have that much money anymore. So we need to invest in clothing that we know is going to last longer. And I think that's the same goes for any industry. It's about things that are recognizing the preciousness of them.
Well, I'm mindful of time, and I know you have to jet off back home before the curfew. Craig, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it here on Newzroom Afrika.